Hi, I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, the latest on the budget battle on Capitol Hill. Obamacare still a bone of contention as the clock ticks down to a possible government shutdown. And with or without a shutdown, San Diego's defense industry is bracing for more cutbacks. We'll tell you about the latest forecasts.
Tonight at a public hearing in Carlsbad, the three options for decommissioning the San Onfre nuclear power plant. What are the risks and how long will it take? Then minimum wage will jump by $2 an hour in the next few years. Will it really help the working poor in San Diego, or could jobs be cut? I'm Peggy Pico with those stories just ahead.
And this woman is a fully fledged doctor in her home country of Iraq, but she can't practice medicine in San Diego. A look at the struggles of white coat professionals forced into blue collar jobs. KPBS Evening Edition starts now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Time is running out to avoid a partial government shutdown. You've heard this before. Now the Senate is still working on its spending bill, but House Republicans say they won't pass it unless it defunds Obamacare. And there's another deadline coming up, too. We have the latest from Jerry Bodlander of the Associated Press.
With government agencies making contingency plans for a possible partial shutdown next week, the Senate continued work on a spending bill to avoid that. A day after Senator Ted Cruz's talkathon ended, Democrats made clear any shot at the health care law is a waste of time.
You can huff, you can puff for 21 hours, but you cannot blow the Affordable Care Act away.
While Democrats plan to pass a bill that just deals with spending, Speaker John Boehner doesn't see the House accepting it, though he believes a shutdown on Tuesday can be avoided. Republicans are also looking at next month's deadline to raise the debt ceiling and plan to attach conditions like a one-year delay in the individual mandate to buy health insurance. The president again ruled out any negotiations.
The entire world looks to us to make sure that the world economy is stable. You don't mess with that.
Now, the president says, I'm not going to negotiate. Well, I'm sorry, but it just doesn't work that way.
Unless politicians can work it out, the government's borrowing authority runs out in 3 weeks. Jerry Bodlander, Associated Press, Capitol Hill.
Now, the military remains an economic force in San Diego, but we are already feeling the impact of a shrinking defense budget. KPBS Business and Environment reporter Eric Anderson says a new report finds defense spending will likely continue to drop.
The latest review of the military's economic impact in San Diego shows the military spends nearly $25 billion here and is responsible for creating 300,000 jobs. Loma Nazarene University economist Lynn Reeser says the military generates about a fifth of the region's economic activity. However, she says defense budgets are shrinking.
In 2014, we're likely to see some reductions in personnel counts, some reductions in contracts, and cutbacks in research grants. We still will see increases in payments for veterans and retirees, but overall defense spending and jobs linked to the military will be down.
Reeser says the Navy's 53 ships homeported here bring $4 billion into the region each year. An aircraft carrier alone generates an economic impact of $500 million. Admiral Patrick Lorge is the commander of Navy Region Southwest. He says budgets are tightening, but not drastically.
I don't know the exact number there. The budget guys back in D.C. know that. But it'll be somewhat less than what we're doing now, but not something we haven't seen in the recent past.
Some budget-cutting moves will actually help the local economy. The Navy is stationing more of its fleet in the Pacific Theater, and San Diego is poised to take a leadership role in the development of unmanned military vehicles. Eric Anderson, KPBS News.
Folks at City Hall have rehired 2 lobbying firms fired by former Mayor Bob Filner. The city will pay one firm up to $135,000 to lobby in Washington. The other will get up to $126,000 to lobby in Sacramento. Interim Mayor Todd Gloria says the city needs someone advocating for its interests in both capitals.
We have to be there advocating on this and on other issues, things like homeland security, border infrastructure, housing, transportation. Now we are, and hiring them was critical to making sure that as big decisions are made, both in Sacramento and Washington, D.C., that San Diego's concerns are heard and hopefully acted upon.
Now, Gloria is going to Washington next week as part of a group meeting with our local congressional delegation. Federal agents say they've broken up a fraud ring stealing identities to claim millions in refunds from the government. Agents say they brought people into the country on student visas, set them up in apartments in San Diego, and put them to work filing phony tax returns, in some cases for people who were dead. Investigators say the suspects got $7 million just from the IRS, and they scammed banks too. The total take estimated at $20 million. 22 people have been arrested so far. Federal regulators are meeting in Carlsbad at this hour to discuss decommissioning the San Onfre nuclear power plant. Peggy Pico outlines the options.
In just about an hour, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission will hold an informational hearing on the next steps in decommissioning San Onofre nuclear power plant. Here to explain the choices is David Wiseman with the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility. David, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, we know federal regulators gave Southern California and Edison 2 years to develop sort of a shutdown blueprint, if you will. Edison says they're going to have this blueprint available by next summer. But how long do they actually have to physically decommission this plant or dismantle it?
According to the NRC's regulations, a utility has up to 60 years to return the site to the standards they've set for background radiation and for what they would call an unrestricted use.
So 60 years.
That's correct.
I understand there's really only 3 options in order to remove radioactive components. And I want to talk about them one by one, starting with decon, the immediate dismantling of the facility. How does that work, and how likely is this particular option going to be used?
Yeah, decon means you just begin taking it apart. That has to do with the components internally, the piping, the plumbing, the radioactive vessel itself. This has been used on the East Coast. I'm aware of examples in New England where a group of reactors, 900 megawatt pressurized reactors, so they do have something in common with San Onofre, but they were smaller. And what happened is a lot of these were decommissioned in the mid-90s because of economic reasons, and they began taking it apart, they began blasting the cement, and it took 10 years basically to get it down so that that field, that site now looks just like the empty field it was before they built it.
And let's talk about the second option, safe store, which involves, I guess, waiting for radiation levels to decay and then dismantling the plant. What's the advantage to that, and who here in California has done this?
Right, a safe store means that you do wait 10 years, maybe longer, to begin the work. And part of the advantage there is the very hottest radionuclides can decay over time. What this does is it allows the workers who would be exposed to this during the cleanup to spend longer hours working instead of working in such limited bits. So efficiently, you might get more work done at a later date, saving money in the long run. Safe store plants in California that I know of include Humboldt Bay, and that might have been the case for Rancho Seco initially, but it's now been decommissioned.
Okay, and the third option, which I understand has never been used before here in the U.S., it's called Entomb, which basically involves encasing all of the radioactive components and keeping them there permanently. Now, the estimated cost of decommissioning, I guess regardless of which kind they choose, which plan they choose, is just over $4 billion. And I understand half of that money has already been provided by customers putting into that fund. And before I ask you about it, I want to hear from Stephen Piggott. He's the VP of Southern California Edison, and here's what he says about this money for decommissioning.
Now that we're focused on decommissioning, our job here is to get that done in the manner most cost-effective to our customers. So we are now engaged in the process of studying whether or not it would be most cost-effective to leave the plant in a shutdown condition for some period.
So kind of talking about that safe store option might be financially better for San Onofre.
Well, you have to remember that they had planned on keeping it running originally for another 10 years, and money was going to be accruing from ratepayers in the fund during that time, so they may be hoping to build that fund back up during these years.
What kind of oversight, if any, is there on how this money, this decommissioning money, is going to be spent?
Well, that is happening at the Public Utilities Commission. The Public Utilities Commission has been holding decommissioned fund proceedings every 3 years for decades now to determine how much money and whether it's wisely spent. The Alliance has filed in the decommission funding, as are other parties, in the hopes of keeping an eye out. One of the things, for example, we're asking is, with this money that we've been collecting, how much of that can be shifted to more quickly moving the dangerous fuel from those spent fuel pools to the much safer above-ground casks or canisters? So those are the kinds of questions we'll be asking in the decommissioning proceeding.
How about oversight regulations when it actually comes to the physical safety of doing this, the logistics of doing this, and how safe it is to the community and to our environment?
That is the NRC's job, and that is apparently what they're going to be introducing us to at the meeting tonight, what they plan to do. The NRC is responsible. The NRC has stated that they plan to do we're going to be on top of this. But remember, that's also what they promised us regarding the steam generator installation. So they're coming into this community not quite batting barely 500 on maintaining their promises of accurate and safe oversight.
All right, David Wiseman with the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We have a lot more on our website, kpbs.org.
The world's largest solar energy plant is ready to go out in the Mojave Desert. It's right off Interstate 15, just a few miles from the Nevada border. It has 300,000 mirrors. One of the plant's generators was tested this week. When all three are online, the plant will produce enough power for 140,000 homes. A federal judge wants the Navy to take another look at its plan to use more sonar during training exercises. He says regulators need to look at long-term effects of marine life. The ruling comes in a case involving permits for training on the coast from Mendocino to Canada. Environmentalists say the permits underestimated what sonar could do to whales, dolphins, and other animals. Clearing forests can cause animals to die out, but what happens when you carve a forest up into many tiny islands? UC San Diego biologist David Woodruff has been studying this for more than 20 years now. He and his colleagues find that mammals in isolated patches of forest can go extinct much sooner than previously thought. They studied a forest in Thailand, now mostly underwater. After the government built a dam nearby, only a handful of islands were left for animals to call home. Woodruff knew the animals living on these forest islands would eventually die out, but he was surprised to see how quickly. It took just 25 years for most small mammals to be wiped out.
Unfortunately, the forest is becoming silent. The birds are going, the mammals are going, and it's not the place it was, and that's happened very quickly.
Woodruff says conservation efforts need to focus on keeping larger areas of forest intact. We want to bring you this update now on an ongoing investigation into Mello-Roos property taxes in the Poway Unified School District. Our media partner, iNewsSource, found some homeowners were being overcharged and some were actually being undercharged. Now, the district responded to our reporting by creating a website for folks to check their bills. It's called PowayParcelInfo.com. Any discrepancies can be reported online. And, of course, you can find all of our coverage about Mello-Roos taxes at kpbs.org/taxes. Well, stop me if you heard this one. The cost to mail a letter could be going up again. The Postal Service is asking for an emergency rate increase, 3 cents more for a first-class stamp. Postmaster General says he has no choice. He says the Postal Service is fighting for its life, expected to lose $6 billion this year. An independent commission has to approve the price increase. California will raise its minimum wage to the highest level of any state in the nation. Peggy Pico looks at how the jump will affect San Diego's working poor.
By next July, California's minimum wage will rise from the current $8 an hour to $9. Then it'll jump again to $10 an hour by January 2016. Some believe the increase will have a big impact throughout the state because California reports having the largest number of working poor in the country. Here to talk about the impact in San Diego are Claire Crawford with the Center on Policy Initiatives and SDSU economics professor Joe Sabia. Welcome.
Thank you.
I know not everyone's really happy about raising the minimum wage, and I wanted to share this with you. Assemblymember Brian Jones from Santee opposes the increase, saying it'll backfire on the working poor, and quote, "This act will not just hurt business, it will drive up payroll costs, so those who do business or those businesses hire fewer people, or even worse, cut the hours of hardworking Californians trying to raise their families." So I want to get your response from that. And Joe, I'll start with you first. Do you think it's really going to make it harder and people are going to lose some jobs?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the vast majority of California's working poor actually will not be affected by this policy change. Only 14% of Californians who earn between $8 and $10 an hour are actually poor, so most won't even be affected. Among the small share that are affected, some will actually be hurt by this increase as a result of their employers laying them off or cutting their hours. So the hope that we help lift the working poor out of poverty will be negatively impacted by the fact that some of these folks are going to lose their jobs and be dropped further into poverty.
Has that traditionally happened in the past? I mean, it seems like you're still going to need workers regardless of whether you pay them $8 or $10. Are you talking about slashing their hours?
Yeah, they could slash their hours, or they can cut jobs. That has, in fact, happened with many state and federal minimum wage increases. And, in fact, we've seen grocery stores begin substituting toward, for example, from checkout clerks to the automated sort of self-checkout lanes. So that's another way that firms can respond to minimum wage hikes.
And, Claire, what do you think?
Well, there's been overwhelming research on this very question, and a recent study looked at over 20 years of studies around the minimum wage and its impact on employment. And it found that there really wasn't an impact on overall employment levels. It actually doesn't eliminate jobs. What it does do, though, is if you ask any low-wage worker in San Diego what it's going to mean to them to have $2 an hour extra in their pockets, they're going to tell you that that's going to have a huge increase. Wages since the recession have really not kept up at all with costs. And what we've seen in the recession and in the recovery is that the jobs that were lost were, by and large, middle-income jobs. And the jobs that have been added since the economy's been recovering have been really low-wage jobs and overwhelmingly low-wage jobs. So, if you look at the...
Go ahead.
Sorry,
I was just going to say, your center did a report on poverty in San Diego County, and I just wanted to drill down a little bit on that and ask you, who is working for minimum wage? Are these teenagers, people trying to support their families?
So the data that we've seen about who would be impacted by California's increase in the minimum wage says that over 90% of the people impacted are people over the age of 20. One interesting statistic that is really sad, frankly, is that the number of workers that are impacted that are between the ages of 16 and 19 is around 5.3%. That's the same number as the number of employees that are over 60 years old. So there's a lot of senior citizens, there's a lot of adult workers, and from our own experience just talking to workers in San Diego, we see plenty of single parents struggling with minimum wage and low wage jobs, that this is going to be a huge benefit for them.
What types of jobs are typically minimum wage jobs?
So certainly hotel industry jobs are low wage. In the retail is a big one. Food services, food preparation, those are all the fast food workers. I think the things that people would expect to see.
Okay. California's unemployment rate last month was at 8.9%, slightly up from the month before. What about the argument that maintaining a low minimum wage actually helps the economy because it creates more jobs, as you were alluding to earlier?
Yeah, I would argue, so I've been very much in the middle of the empirical research to which Claire referred about the impacts of minimum wages on employment and poverty, and would suggest that the evidence is pretty clear that higher minimum wages do not alleviate poverty or provide an engine for economic growth. In fact, there's some evidence in research that I've done that increases in state minimum wages actually decrease gross domestic product at the state level that's generated by lower skilled industries, in part because of higher labor costs and because of laying off workers. So we have to get a handle. If the objective is to help lift the working poor out of poverty, we have to think of public policies that are actually going to be effective at achieving that end. And I would argue that raising the minimum wage isn't. Most minimum wage workers live in households with incomes 2 or 3 times the poverty line. They are second or third earners in non-poor households. You're not targeting the right people, given the objective.
Okay, and Claire, let's end on this. As far as the $2 an hour, you mentioned $2 an hour extra for these people who are making this wage really does have an impact. What kind of impact are they telling you?
It has a huge impact. Just looking at some of the numbers, average rents in San Diego are over $1,400 a month. Right now, if you're making minimum wage, you can't even afford to pay that monthly rent. Your income is lower, and that's just housing costs. So being able to afford rent, being able to afford to get to and from work, and if you're one of the young people that, Professor Sabia and others think are the only people making minimum wage, which I think is clearly not true. If you walk down any street in San Diego, you'll see that college costs are astronomically high, and those very same young people actually do need a higher wage to be able to afford to get to and from school.
But if if you lose your job, you won't have more income.
There's that too. Now, there's a whole lot more, obviously, to discuss about that. It's on our website, kpbs.org. We are out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, here's something you might not think about when you get into a cab. Your taxi driver could be a doctor. That's because many refugee medical professionals have to ditch their white coats when they arrive in the U.S. Speak City Heights reporter Megan Burks looks at why they have such a tough time getting into the healthcare industry, despite the need for more doctors and nurses.
Many of my friends asked to borrow this book.
Najwan Alani flips through a tattered study guide for the first phase of the U.S. medical licensing exam.
So just to remind myself, sometimes I wrote a song or any kind, just to put the name of any disease or any medicine in a song to remind myself of this.
After she used the workbook to study for and pass the test in 2011, it's less a book and more a stack of pages saturated with highlighter ink. But Alani keeps it as a souvenir to commemorate her first stop in a years-long and nearly $10,000 journey to practice medicine again. The Iraqi refugee spent 7 years as a primary care physician in Iraq and Jordan. In the United States, she's starting at what seems like square one. Foreign-trained doctors must pass American licensing exams and compete for residency positions with fresh-faced medical school graduates before becoming full-fledged doctors again in the U.S. Alani's experience treating shrapnel wounds and delivering babies in a war zone doesn't put her at the front of the line.
Sometimes we faced like lack of electricity while we working. Especially for me, I faced like a case of delivery without any electricity. I need just a single flashlight to make this mom pass the delivery safely for her and her baby.
Alani says she and her colleagues worked under intense pressure during the early years of the Iraq War. Medicine and supplies were limited. The streets surrounding the hospital were so dangerous her chief resident was killed on the way to work. Now in the U.S., she's confronting those experiences once more, translating them for cover letters and mock interviews.
In war circumstances, you face a lot of injuries, a lot of emergencies. This increases your skills and confidence and ability to work as a team.
Sophie Cheatham is helping Alani navigate the U.S. job market.
The path is long, it's arduous, it's incredibly costly.
She runs the Bridge to Employment program through the International Rescue Committee. Each year, it offers grants and guidance to 75 foreign licensed medical professionals who want to get back into the healthcare industry. Some first take jobs as taxi drivers and cashiers when they arrive in the U.S.
Initially, when refugees arrive into San Diego, they want nothing more than to find employment, to support their families, to lead self-sufficient lives, and so recertification isn't initially a priority for them.
Cheatham says her clients gain insight into the U.S. work culture through those early jobs. But for a nation already lacking about 16,000 primary care physicians, the benefit of having doctors drive people to the airport or run a checkout stand is less clear.
And what can I say? I mean, we need primary care physicians. Everybody knows that, and everybody says that.
Stephen Hayden heads UC San Diego's medical residency program. He says many of the nation's primary care residency positions go unfilled each year because the line of work isn't considered lucrative enough to pay down student debt. He says it might make sense to fast-track doctors like Alani, who's already expressed interest in practicing family medicine and whose schooling was paid for by the Iraqi government.
They'll still have to complete, at least with the current structure and the current rules, a primary care residency of some sort, internal medicine, pediatrics, family medicine, whatever it may be. But, especially given that some of these slots are more difficult to fill, I think it wouldn't be unreasonable to consider a program where these individuals would then fill some of those slots.
But streamlining the process for refugee doctors could be a tricky line to walk. Despite the trouble filling primary care residencies, Hayden says competition among U.S. med students is high.
We are getting to a point very soon. I've looked at the curves, and it looks like probably in about 2015, the number of U.S. graduates will exceed the number of first board residency slots that are available.
You have different kinds of specialties, I put check on the family medicine and internal medicine.
As Alani clicks through an online residency application system, she projects an unfaltering calmness. She says she doesn't mind being thrown into an overflowing applicant pool with graduates 10 years her junior.
In the medical field, you always feel like you are learning. It's a continuous learning for anybody. But to work with the people fresh graduated, I can be helpful with my experience. They could be helpful with their fresh knowledge. I think we will be a good team together. After all, it will be all good for the hospital and for the patients.
Alani will find out if she's matched with the residency program in March. Megan Burks, KPBS News.
Sunshine and warmer temperatures are headed our way, low 80s along the coast over the weekend. Warmer for the Inland Valley, into the upper 80s the next few days. The winds are easing up in the mountain areas with temperatures into the mid-70s. The desert also getting a break from the wind, upper 80s to low 90s there. You can find tonight's stories and download the KPBS app all on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Good night.